Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, well, we're doing more than just defining microeconomics. We're kind of pulling back the curtain, aren't we?
We are. We're looking at the basic forces shaping almost every decision we make.
Yeah, from like your morning coffee right up to huge global policies. Our mission really is to unpack how people, individuals, and firms navigate this world where there's just not enough of everything to go around.
Scarcity, you're right.
Exactly. And how those small choices, add up to create this massive, complex economy we live in.
And the really interesting part, I think, is that these aren't just like dry academic ideas. We're
Mhm.
bringing in a specific policy angle too, so you can hopefully connect these core concepts to,
Yeah.
actual real world stuff and the big debates happening right now.
Okay, so let's start there. Microeconomics.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally about scarcity, isn't it? That's the engine.
It absolutely is. If
Yeah.
everything was abundant, unlimited, well, there'd be no need for economics, really. No choices needed.
But it's not like that.
Yeah.
So every choice involves giving something up.
Precisely. And because scarcity is just everywhere, every economic player could be you deciding what to buy, could be a giant company is always doing something called constrained optimization.
Right. Trying to get the best outcome.
The best outcome possible for them, given the limits they face. Money limits, time limits, resource limits.
Which immediately brings up trade-offs. You do one thing, you can't do another.
Yep. And the best way, the most powerful way economists think about this is opportunity cost.
Ah, yes.
Oh.
Not just what you pay in dollars, but the value of the next best thing you didn't choose.
Exactly. So if you, binge watch a show tonight, the cost isn't just your Netflix fee, right?
Right. It's maybe the valuable work you could have done instead, or, I don't know, learning a skill, talking to family.
Whatever your next best alternative was. And that's why sometimes economics gets called the dismal science.
Because nothing's free.
Pretty much. That's the core idea. Every single choice, even seemingly free ones, has an implicit cost, an opportunity lost. It makes us face, well, difficult realities sometimes.
Balancing what feels good now versus maybe long-term benefits.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I think understanding it is actually really empowering. I like the analogy to engineering. Think about those MIT robot contests like 2.007.
Oh, no, yeah, legendary.
Students get a box of parts, right? Fixed materials.
Mm,
And they have to build a robot to do something specific. That's pure constrained optimization.
it really is. Same problem structure.
And that's what microeconomics does, just applied to, well, people's lives and how businesses run. It's the same basic problem, different context.
It's a great parallel. And actually, modern economics, a lot of it, really took shape at MIT back in the 40s and 50s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, people like Paul Samuelson, they were explicitly applying these engineering principles, optimization, efficiency, modeling to economic questions. So that analytical approach, it has deep roots there.
Okay, but the real world is, incredibly messy, right?
Mm.
Way more complex than a box of robot parts. So how do economists even start to deal with that?
Right. We use simplified models, and this is key. You have to remember these models are, well, they're never 100% accurate. They can't be.
But they're useful anyway.
Hopefully. The aim is for them to be pretty true. Maybe capturing, say, 10% to, 95% of what's really going on in a specific situation. Enough to give us insight.
There's that quote, isn't there, by George Box.
All models are wrong, but some are useful.
Exactly. And that's especially true in social sciences like economics.
And you can't capture everything.
You can't. So the models go for tractability. They try to explain big patterns, broad phenomena, with a relatively small set of steps or assumptions, even if it means simplifying things quite a bit.
The goal is understanding the core mechanism, not recreating every detail.
Precisely. And when we use these models, we're trying to understand them on maybe 3 levels.
Okay.
First, and maybe the most important, is just the intuitive level.
Yeah.
Can you explain the basic idea simply? Like, could you explain it to your mom and she'd get it? That's the mom test.
Right. No jargon, just the core concept. Then there's the graphical level. Economists love their graphs. XY plots. They're a visual shorthand for these relationships.
Supply and demand curves, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And finally, there's the mathematical level, which, okay, can look scary sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's often the most precise way to state the relationships and, crucially, to test them against data. It might be the least intuitive at first, but it's rigorous.
Makes sense. So speaking of graphs and core ideas,
Yeah.
we absolutely have to talk about the bedrock supply and demand.
Can't do economics without it.
And you can't really talk supply and demand without mentioning Adam Smith.
Yeah,
the sort of founding father.
absolutely. His book from 1776, The Wealth of Nations, just laid out so much of the groundwork.
And he had that famous puzzle, right? The water diamond thing.
The water diamond paradox, yeah. It bugged him. Water, obviously essential for survival, but it's dirt cheap. Or even free.
There's diamonds.
Huh?
Pretty useless, really. Frivolous, but incredibly expensive. How does that work?
And Smith's big insight was, it's not just about demand or utility. Yes, we demand tons of water and very few diamonds, but you have to look at supply too.
Okay.
The supply of water for most people is practically infinite. It falls out of the sky. But the supply of diamonds, well, that's very limited, naturally scarce, and also controlled.
So you need both sides.
You need both blades of the scissors, as you put it, the supply and demand scissors. You can't understand prices or markets by looking at just one side. You need both together.
Okay, let's make that more concrete. How about roses? The market for roses.
Perfect example.
So if we imagine that graph again, the demand curve, it
In
slopes
fact,
downwards.
Right. Basic idea. The higher the price per rose, the fewer roses people generally want to buy. Makes intuitive sense.
Sure, less bang for your buck.
And then the supply curve, that slopes upwards.
Because
Because if the price of roses goes up, growers, the firms, they're thinking, hey, we can make more profit here. So they're willing to plant more, harvest more, bring more roses to the market.
higher price, more incentive to produce.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And the magic point is where those two lines cross.
That's the one, market equilibrium. It's the price and quantity where the amount consumers want to buy exactly matches the amount producers want to sell.
So say $3 a rose and 600 roses get sold. Everyone who wants to buy at $3 finds a seller. Everyone who wants to sell at $3 finds a buyer.
Exactly. The market clears, we say. Both sides are, in a sense, satisfied with that transaction at that price. No leftover roses, no unfulfilled buyers clamoring for them at that price. It's a really powerful idea for predicting where markets will settle.
Okay. Now, this seems like a good point to bring up. Something you mentioned can be tricky. The difference between positive and normative analysis.
Yes, super important distinction. And yeah, people mix them up all the time.
So positive analysis is,
Positive analysis is about the way things are. It's descriptive. It tries to explain and predict economic phenomena based on theory and evidence. No value judgment.
just the facts, ma'am.
Kind of, yeah. Whereas normative analysis is about the way things should be. It involves value judgments, opinions, ideas about fairness or what's desirable.
Got it. Is versus ought.
Exactly. And the classic, maybe slightly provocative example to illustrate this is that kidney auction story from the early days of eBay.
Oh, I remember hearing about that. Someone listed a kidney.
Yeah, listed a kidney for sale. Bidding started around $25,000 apparently.
Wow.
And it shot to over $5 million before eBay, understandably, pulled the plug very quickly.
Okay, so applying our distinction, the positive question is,
The positive question is, why did the price get so astronomically high?
and the answer is
Yeah,
straight out of Adam Smith.
textbook Adam Smith,
Yeah.
demand. Incredibly high. People are literally dying for want of a kidney. Supply on eBay, essentially zero, maybe one briefly. So huge demand, tiny supply, price goes sky high. That's the positive analysis.
Okay, clear enough. But then the normative question is,
Should you be allowed to sell your kidney on eBay? Or anywhere, for that matter.
and that's where it gets complicated.
Very. From a purely, let's say, standard economic efficiency point of view, you could make a case for yes.
How so?
Well, look, thousands die waiting for transplants. Millions of people have two healthy kidneys but only really need one. A seller, maybe someone very poor, could have their life transformed by a huge payment, say $1 million. The buyer gets to live. It looks like a voluntary transaction that makes both sides better off.
That's the purely economic argument, maybe. But we don't allow it, so why not?
Right, lots of reasons. One big category is market failures,
Like what?
like fraud. How do you even know it's a real healthy kidney being offered online? Or imperfect information? Does the person selling truly grasp the long-term health risks of living with one kidney, especially if they're desperate? Probably not perfectly.
Okay, so the market wouldn't necessarily work smoothly or safely.
Exactly. Then there's the whole issue of equity or fairness.
The idea that only rich people could afford to buy kidneys.
Precisely. It would likely mean kidneys go to the highest bidder, not necessarily those who need them most medically. That clashes deeply with how most societies feel organs should be allocated, usually based on need, waiting lists, compatibility. There's actually fascinating work on this, like from Nikhil Agarwal, on how to design allocation systems optimally and fairly.
Right, so it violates a sense of fairness for many people.
Definitely. And then there's the whole field of behavioral economics,
Yes.
which basically says, hang on, people aren't always the perfectly rational, calculating machines that simple models assume. We make mistakes. We have
And
biases.
someone might sell a kidney even if, rationally, it's not in their long-term best interest.
Exactly. Maybe due to extreme poverty, short-term thinking, inability to really weigh the long-term health trade-offs against immediate cash, they might make a choice they deeply regret later.
So multiple reasons beyond pure supply and demand why we might say no normatively.
For sure. But the crucial point is, you really have to do the positive analysis first. Understand why the price would be high, how that market mechanism works, before you can have a sensible debate about whether it should be allowed. You can't jump straight to the ought without understanding the I's.
It's tempting, though.
It is. And our sources actually bring up an interesting viewpoint here that some see economics, sort of fundamentally, as leaning towards a right-wing science.
Oh, how so?
Because the default starting point is often that markets work efficiently, that the market knows best, and that intervention, while sometimes needed, often messes things up.
Which naturally leads us to thinking about different economic systems, right?
Yeah.
Capitalism versus a command economy.
Exactly. So in a largely capitalistic system like the US, it's mostly individuals and private firms making the decisions. What to produce, what to consume. The government sets some rules of the road, enforcing contracts, preventing fraud, hopefully.
Hopefully.
But it doesn't dictate production quotas for cars or bread.
And this system, well, it's been linked to America's huge economic growth and wealth creation.
Undeniably, one of the richest nations ever, but it's also produced massive inequality. The U.S. is, by many measures, the most unequal major developed nation. And even with rules, you still get huge problems like, Enron-level fraud or situations where information is so skewed it's barely a fair market.
And Adam Smith's big idea here was the invisible hand, wasn't it?
That's the one. The almost magical idea that individuals and firms just pursuing their own self-interest, trying to make profit, trying to get the best deal, are unintentionally led as if by an invisible hand to do what's good for society overall.
Though good for society initially mostly meant like maximizing the total amount of stuff produced and consumed, maximum efficiency.
Pretty much, yeah. Maximum total surplus in economic terms. The alternative being the command economy.
Where the government makes all the calls.
Right. The government doesn't just make the rules, it basically owns the road and tells everyone where to drive. Think of the old Soviet Union, before 1989. Central planners decided how many shoes to make, where to send grain.
How did that work out?
Not well. Not well at all. In theory, maybe you could ensure perfect equity, but in practice, it led to huge inefficiencies, shortages of things people wanted, surpluses of things they didn't, lots of corruption to get access to goods, long waiting lists. It just couldn't cope with the complexity or human nature.
So Adam Smith kind of had it right about the power of decentralized decisions.
On that front, history suggests he really did. The command economy model generally led to stagnation and eventually collapse. It just couldn't harness individual incentives effectively.
Okay, so looking ahead for us, where do we go from here?
Well, first, we'll dig deeper into how Smith's magic is supposed to work. We'll look at how consumers make choices to maximize their well-being or utility. That's the demand side. Then we'll look at the supply side, how firms make production decisions, how costs work, different types of markets they might operate in.
Putting the pieces together.
Exactly. Building up that supply and demand model more rigorously to see how market equilibrium comes about.
But then
We pivot. We start looking at where it doesn't work perfectly. Where does this elegant model kind of break down in reality?
market failures again.
Market failures, definitely. But also digging deeper into those equity concerns and bringing in more of those behavioral economics insights about how real people actually make decisions, not just the idealized rational agent.
And the math and problem sets, those help nail down the mechanics.
Yeah, that's where recitations really come in, getting your hands dirty with the calculations and applications.
Right. Well, this has been a fantastic setup. I feel like we've really laid the groundwork, sketched out the landscape of these core ideas about choices, markets, all that.
Yeah, and even though economics gets that dismal science tag because it's always about trade-off,
Always a cost.
always a cost, yeah. Understanding these principles, especially constrained optimization, it's actually kind of, well, I find it fun. It makes you see the world differently.
It definitely does. It highlights why markets can be so incredibly powerful at allocating resources efficiently.
But it also shines a light on exactly why and where they might fail and where there might be a role for, collective action, government, other institutions to step in and maybe improve things.
Right. Addressing those failures or those fairness concerns the market alone doesn't solve.
Exactly. It's that constant tension.
So, okay, here's something for you, the listener, to chew on as we wrap up this part. Given everything we've touched on, this powerful invisible hand, but also its potential downsides, the market failures, the inequality, the behavioral quirks,
Hmm.
how do you think we should strike that balance?
Hmm.
How much should we rely on the market's power to drive efficiency versus stepping in to ensure fairness, protect people, and fix those inevitable market breakdowns?
It's not
That's not an easy question.
not at all.
Think about how these big ideas play out, not just in headlines, but in your own life, your own choices day to day. Where do you see those trade-offs?